Hey folks, we're going to give a few minutes lead in for folks to find their way in. We are recording this for some folks to view if they can't make it today. So if you're on the run from the law and you don't want record of your face, feel free to blip out your cameras. At the very least, we're gonna kind of lead our own chat for a while and leave time for Q&A, but we'll ask folks to keep their mics muted just so we're not picking up a bunch of auxiliary sound as we go. And I'll mention this again later, but if folks have questions as we go, if you throw those in the chat, we will really be trying to leave time to answer those later on.
Yeah, thanks y'all for being here.
Yes, welcome. We're just going to wait another minute or so as people are popping on. Fun to see some familiar faces here.
I'm excited to see people I don't know.
Yeah.
Yes.
I thought about taking this conversation wearing a wig just to throw people off. So the people who knew me, they would get it. The people who didn't would be like, wow, does that guy actually have like a really big mullet?
I actually was surprised you didn't show up with a wig.
I heavily considered it, figured it might decrease credibility, so decided to.
Being an artist, though, you have a little more leeway.
The sheer number of wigs you own makes me as a bald man feel particularly jealous or like I should at least be picking up some of these extras from you.
And I will note, my buddy responded, those wigs need to be burned. To everybody who's on here, there is a chat. So feel free, as Jim mentioned, to toss any questions that you have in that chat. We have somebody who's going to be documenting those, and we'll come back to those there. But also feel free to use it as an opportunity to either acquire some wigs or just network and chat with folks that are here.
So, shall we get started?
Yeah, I think so.
Yep.
All right. So welcome, everyone. I am Katie Asmus. Some of you I know, some of you I don't. I'm going to say a little bit more about me in a moment, but I wanted to give you a little background about this time. So a little over a year ago, Adam and I were hanging out at a family party. So we're all family here. And we're talking about our work like we do often because it's such a big part of our lives and passions, and talking about the ups, the downs of entrepreneurship, and sort of laughing a little bit about how people often say, "You're so lucky." And we're like, "Oh, this is not luck, believe me, but this is a lot of work." And so we left that conversation, and I had this inspiration to invite Adam, who is my cousin, and James, I also call him Jim, because we're all entrepreneurs, to jump on and have a conversation together about our experiences, again, the ups and downs. And so I'm going to pass it to Jim because one of the things he does in the world is MC. He's very good at it. So he's going to keep the flow going today.
Excellent. Well, hi, everyone. So my name is James, or Jim Asmus. Thank you all for joining this. We're going to try and talk about, though we come from very different career, the specificity of our work. We're hoping that there are a lot of commonalities, or that there's a lot to be learned from what's similar and what's different from our experiences of turning our passions into making our own career paths and kind of working for ourselves. So to that end, actually, I'd love to just start with just a quick, short version of your background, the specific work we're each doing, and what pathway kind of brought us from our interest to what in particular we're doing now. Adam, do you want to start us off?
Yes. Hey guys, my name is Adam Vicarel. I own a branding and graphic design studio based in Denver, Colorado. So we specialize in logo design, packaging design, mainly over the last few years in consumer packaged goods. So basically anything you see in the grocery store, but also cannabis and spirits. We also do hand painted murals. So all of our work has kind of an undertone or a foundation of hand-drawn typography and illustration. So the clients that we work with, some are brands that you've never heard of, and some are businesses like NBC, Lululemon, Twitter. So some big international brands, and they come to us for work that feels highly approachable and work that tells a story. So that's the majority of the work that I do on a daily basis. I also, about a year and a half ago, co-founded a company based in Cleveland called All Cleveland Coffee. We basically do direct-to-consumer whole bean coffee sales, and we are partnered with the Cleveland Food Bank. So for every bag of coffee that you buy, we donate 3 meals back to the Cleveland Food Bank. So I do have my hand in a few different entrepreneurial endeavors. And I think that's kind of a good kind of overview if one of y'all want to.
Awesome. Yeah, Katie, do you want to tell us about yours?
Yep. So my name is Katie Asmus, and I'm a psychotherapist. I'm also an educator, do a lot of training and mentoring of therapists, some coaching, life coaching, and a lot of rites of passage work as well. And my business is the Somatic Nature Therapy Institute, which is essentially the evolution of my work in one place, and is in person, outdoors, online. And now we have a team of several therapists, interns, great support team. So that's kind of what this looks like overall.
Amazing.
Jim. Yeah.
Hi, and then so I'm James Asmus, and I am primarily a writer, but I have written for theater, comedy, video games. I've spent the last 16 years mostly writing comic books and graphic novels for Marvel Comics, DC. I've written a bunch of Rick and Morty, Adventure Time, My Little Pony, all kinds of a whole range of stuff. And then transitioned into writing, I don't know if I said this, like mobile games, video games. I've written and produced for television. I've done film and television development. And in recent years got recruited into writing color text for cookbooks and cocktail books and some other nonfiction sort of things like that. So it's ever expanding. And I really love it. I've taught writing. I spent years doing theater and improv. That's sort of what I came up doing, and did some stand-up. And so I've also taught theater, I've taught playwriting, I've taught comedy, I've taught improv as well. But yeah, for the last 15, 20 years have primarily just been working as a writer. And I, unlike my family members, I don't do charity work, so I can't say that. It's all deeply selfish, deeply selfish things. No, I just haven't figured it out other than contributing to sort of fundraiser compilations and things like that. But all right, so that's sort of our very different purviews. And so the thing that I was curious about is, wanted to first talk about how you guys even decided to pursue your careers and your passions as your own business. Because, for context, for me as a writer, I was saying there's not really a lot of ways I could plug myself into that. I could just go out and apply for a salary writing job with benefits or what, it would be hard to sell out if I wanted to, unless it were, maybe there's jobs writing copy for an ad agency or something like that. But in terms of sort of script writing, or there isn't really a thing beyond maybe a 1-year fellowship for theater where you could become an employee and still actually do the writing work, as opposed to something like be an editor or a producer. So Adam, knowing you could do graphic design work within a larger firm or through a dedicated advertising agency or something like that, what was the distinction for you where you felt you had to or wanted to work independently?
Very good question, because to Katie's point earlier, I think there's this perception that self-employment is oftentimes a little bit more free, a little bit more fun, which it certainly can be, but it almost always is a lot more work. So to make that choice is sometimes from the outside a bit of a weird choice. And mine, it kind of sounds cliche, but it's a very true story that I worked for about 2.5 years in Southern Ohio and went and traveled for about 5 months after that first job. And while I was traveling, I was volunteering in the Philippines, and I was helping rebuild homes after a typhoon had come through this small community. And I remember very specifically every single night I was with one of my best buddies. We'd go back to our spot, we'd lay in our tent, and I was laying there and I would kind of be reflecting on the day. And I remembered that these people who literally had nothing, and that nothing was stripped away by this typhoon, they were so happy. They were laughing and joking and just having like every day seemed like an amazing day to them. And as I'm laying in my tent, I'm reflecting on, back in the States, a lot of people are anxious and depressed and overwhelmed and always feel like they're underwater. And whether or not it was the correct attribution, I attributed their happiness to the fact that on a daily basis, they were with people they loved, doing that which they loved. So in that moment, I kind of decided that whatever I did when I got back to the States, I wanted it to be something that felt fulfilling on a daily basis. And at the time, the only way I needed to do that was to pursue art and design on my own terms. So it was, again, a little bit of a cliche moment where it's like, travel changed me, man. But it really did. And so the succinct reasoning was, I wanted to do something that felt deeply fulfilling. And I have found that building my own thing, whatever the hell that thing is, pursuing it on my own terms, that in itself feels deeply fulfilling.
Nice.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. And I would say, just because in this stage I have a limited amount to, but I will say that approach, I think I did realize at one point early on, just that I valued quality of life over some number of financial outcome and being able to spend time with my children. But what I wanted out of my life was to spend more time thinking on my passions and what actually I found fulfilling. And for me, it's, can I craft stories that connect me to the rest of the world or provoke meaning and understanding in people. And that meant more to me than making twice as much in advertising or something else I felt was within the realm of my talents. But I do feel like making that decision is key either way, is what is actually the hierarchy of needs and value to you. Katie, I want to even add a wrinkle to it for you, which is when you first told me you were studying sort of wilderness therapy, that was the first I had ever heard that as a compound phrase. And so how can you also give me a sense of how much are you creating the pathway for this work? Like how much do you have a field of peers versus are you defining some of this?
That's a great question. And I want to back up a little bit because it's so interesting hearing your stories in this particular way. Because when I think about, for me, the evolution of becoming an entrepreneur, I would say I started working when I was 10, and I knew that I was going to have to work my whole life. So pretty young, like maybe junior high, I decided I'm going to do what I would do for no money. And that's how I want to live. And even if, I didn't buy a car till I was 29 years old because I was working in the wilderness and working in nonprofits, not making a lot of money. So the trajectory really was this combination of, I used to have jobs and then I was starting my own thing. And then I'd let go of one job and grow my private practice and then take on another job. And so it was this balance of sort of adding, subtracting while I was really growing my own thing. And with wilderness therapy or nature therapy, I started working in outdoor education, Outward Bound, and programs like that when I was 19 years old. And I remember really early on, I said, my whole life, I'm going to somehow work in nature. I don't know how that's going to work. And when I got to grad school, there was no degree in wilderness therapy at that moment. So every project I did, I incorporated nature into it, just was like creating my own path, which has happened a lot in the work that I do. And as I was graduating, I said to my teacher, I have a dream to start a wilderness therapy program. And she said, they're already starting one here at this school. It's been approved. So you should call them. And I said, great, I don't actually want to start it. I just want to teach in it. So I called them up. They're like, you can be on the committee to hire the director. So I was on the committee to hire the director, and then she hired me as the assistant director. So I have been at the forefront of this field from the very beginning, at least as it's become more known and professionalized and degrees. So it's been incredible to be, yeah, a part of really the evolution of the field.
That's amazing. And it's so funny being family and you're my sister, and I've never specifically asked you that before.
I know.
Even though it's on my
So
mind
many
all the
things
time.
to talk about. I know.
Well, we got to sign up. We got to make more webinars. But you know, both of those actually bring something to mind that as we talk about kind of building, like going from that passion into creating a business. This is sort of less of a question and more of a reflection, because I feel like something that I experienced as a writer is there's a million people trying to be a writer. And when I would write things that were in an effort to sound like or to be akin to things I thought were popular or thought were wanted, those just kind of become a drop in the ocean. But the things I went and wrote for myself that were like kind of the weirdest things I wanted to do, or the things that I most felt like, oh, I don't know if there's an audience for this, those took off more than anything and got more traction. I think like the weird specificity, and you kind of can't fake it, but these were always things I was very passionate about. Both like a musical I did in Chicago that sort of got me hired to write for Marvel Comics, and then in making my own comics, when I step away and do kind of these weird things that aren't calculated efforts to make something that a movie producer would want. These other ones that are more personal and weird, really, those start getting editors to write to me and be like, hey, would you want to write this? Hey, I love this. Would you want to work together? And those tend to provoke that more. And what I hear in your stories too is that I feel like a key to your identity is something so specific. Like the fact that you knew you wanted, Katie, something that was an emerging field, or even not yet a field. And then Adam, the fact that you have this specificity in your business of centering on sort of hand lettering, it's so much more bespoke. And but you have a thing of like, come to me for this. And to what extent, I guess, Katie, you were saying it was kind of from your impulse from the beginning, but Adam, how much of that specificity was finding that you could sort of feel a niche, or, you know, like I find when people understand my specificity, I'm more likely to get work. But it took me forever in my career to kind of recognize that and sort of, prioritize it in a way. So for you, is that just what you always wanted to do, or did you start to recognize there's value in narrowing your identity?
Yes, it's such a good question. And I also want to double down on what you just said about creating something for you, like as opposed to trying to do it to appease everybody. I recently saw Rick Rubin, who, if you guys, people on here who do not know, he's one of the most famous producers in the world, music producers. And I literally just saw an interview of him saying, I'm not thinking about the audience when I'm creating art. I'm creating for me. And the best way for you to create something that's truly resonant with the masses is create something that's deeply resonant to you. And it was just a very interesting kind of overlap there. But in coming back to your question about kind of like focusing in, I struggled for a really long time trying to articulate what it is that I do and why it is valuable to people. Part of it was that I was hand lettering at the time was kind of newer in the graphic design industry, and I didn't really know how to speak to it well. I also early on didn't understand that, you know, I'm going to explain to my dad differently what I do than I would explain to you differently than I would to an agency owner. So I think a little bit of my kind of focus in my work, I almost like didn't even realize what focusing in my work even meant. Like, does that mean that I just draw? Or does that mean that I just draw for brands? Or does that mean that I just draw for apparel? So I think my personal experience has been that, you know, a lot of people ask, should you niche down versus be a jack of all trades? And I've kind of adopted this idea of like, you are the niche, like be the niche yourself. And so it's people are coming to you for whatever it is that you produce. So as a design studio, you could come to us for, you know, strategy and branding for your distillery, but you could also come to us for a really unique take on how to market, you know, a CPA's business. That's never going to happen, I hope to God. No offense to any CPAs out here, but it's less that people are coming to us for a specific thing and more so for like the vibe that we would bring to a thing. And I think that's through embracing this idea that you are the niche. You can, if you're kind of pulling in that which you love into your business as an entrepreneur, people come to you for all that you bring to the table, as opposed to just graphic design or just another outdoor therapy, you know, place, or just some Rick and Morty jokes. You know, I think it's being a little bit more holistic.
Well, I mean,
Yeah.
to that end, like the deep specificity, I think has two benefits. And one is you become the first person people think of for those needs, right? As opposed to you're one of 10 people on a list. And the other thing is the work that will come to you is right. It is the work you're going to
Yeah.
flow with
Right.
most naturally, most beneficially, to where, you know, I definitely could look back at a period in my career where I was trying to write in the voice of just whoever was hiring me or what I felt was their general. I was trying to be a neatly fitting little puzzle piece into someone else's picture. And I saw the decline over years of what I was being offered to write work for hire, to where it was less and less specific. And those things were more and more work for me to get there, to connect or to deliver that. And then once I went back to writing a few things that were really mine in my voice, then people started writing to me like, do you want to write Rick and Morty? And I'm like, that's a perfect fit. And then they would say, you know, do you want to write Creep Show? And I'm like, yes, that is that sort of like dark comedy that is perfect for me. And it was less and less of this like, maybe I'm like the 20th person you should have asked for that. So it goes both ways in terms of you think about what it brings in, but I also think about the effort from you to deliver on what they want. If it really was work that should have gone to someone else, it's going to be twice as much effort to whatever that amount of money or time was.
Totally.
I love that.
And I just think about how much work we put into what we do because we love it. And if you're going down the road of should for very long, you're going to get burnt out so fast. And I just think about, you know, so many of the people I work with, therapists, especially new, you know, everyone's saying niche down, niche down. And I think if you follow your passion and your curiosity, you'll naturally grow yourself, at least in my work, into a niche, because my niche just became, what am I passionate about? What are my questions? What can't I stop thinking about at night? And that really became like the focus for me. So I think anything that comes from your heart and your true passion and curiosity, there's so much more life behind it for us as people who are doing the work and for those receiving the work.
Well said.
So Katie, so knowing that, when you have that drive and you have that goal, and it sounds like you always had that, surely there were still some roadblocks or hurdles you ran into, right? And hopefully you have that motivation to get you through them. But what were some of the things you were not anticipating that you sort of collided with?
Yeah, well, I think a couple pop up immediately that I think are, well, some specific to me, some specific to, or more general to entrepreneurship. But one is, so of the three of us, I'm the oldest. I'm 53 years old. And the first time I wrote a paper on a computer was in graduate school. So for me, there was so much technology phobia for so long that, because I didn't grow up using this, I was like, can somebody else do the technology? And I finally got to a place, obviously in the evolution of the world and my business, where I had this very clear moment that I thought, okay, if I really want to take this to another level, I need to dig in and just learn the thing. So that was huge for me. That was a challenge. And then the other one was starting to get help, hire people to first be administrative support. And now I have a business manager, program manager, but each, like even how do I begin and how do I trust someone and where do I find someone? And how do I teach them my business and what do I hand over and what do I not? Yeah.
Well, obviously, I feel like, Katie, that's what you're saying right there could almost be its own webinar we could have about, because you're right. There's so many ways to slice that. But in the macro, what did you learn from that tremendous process of having to identify the whens, the whos, the hows of those? What's sort of the key takeaways you would have for?
Ooh, about building a team?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Well, I would say, in general, do it sooner than you think you should, because there's always somebody that will do something for 5 hours a week. And what I can do, what I want to be doing, what I can do so much more of if I can hand off some of these other pieces. And then just like everything evolves bit by bit, right? It's like that evolves. We realize, okay, I can hand more over. And then at what point do we have enough documentation that I can just like pass it mostly over? So I think start as soon as you think you need a little help and then grow that really over time. I also think have friends and colleagues that you can talk to who've been where you've been, so you can say, how did you do this? And when did you do it? And what kind of advice can you give me about growing my business in that way?
Yeah, I will say, just Adam, I'm going to want to pick your brain on a similar thing because I know you've gone through hiring people. For what it's worth and for context to triangulate these, as a writer, I have not ever really full-time hired someone. I've done contracting things where I've gotten someone to do some research for me or do some other similar support on a specific project. Otherwise, I've had agents, managers, lawyers, things like that work on commission. And so it really is like, help me get through the contract on this particular project, or every time I sell something, you're going to negotiate for a higher rate, whatever it is. And they're getting a percentage. So just to provide that frame of reference, I know some people hire assistants in a similar way. I'm too anal about my own communication, which feels like it would be the easiest thing to farm out. Anyway, Adam, so yeah, you have a full-time employee, part-time employee? Tell me about how you expanded your team.
Yeah. So I have one full-time designer and work with a number of contractors. So sometimes it's just the two of us. Sometimes we're functioning more as a team of 5 or 6, where we have, it's mainly me that's overseeing. So I don't have a project manager who comes in, but I'm overseeing other, an animator, another art director, another designer, a copywriter. And I got kind of forced into hiring my first contractor. I was in New York for a project. I had a project I had been discussing a couple months prior pop up, and they're basically like, hey, we're ready to go, 2 months later, and we need to have it done by end of week. And I could have said no because we weren't under a contract. However, it was an amazing opportunity. It was a national brand. It was going to be in grocery stores everywhere. And it was all hand lettering. So I was just going to be drawing like the word blueberry, the way a blueberry is supposed to be drawn. We all know what that looks like. You shouldn't know. That's my job. But I couldn't pass up the opportunity. So I kind of was forced into bringing in a contractor to support that while I was in New York. And the main thing that I feel like it taught me was I was so precious and anal and perfectionist with everything associated with my business. And I think rightly so as an entrepreneur, because it is an extension of our identity. Yeah. So if something came out incorrectly or wasn't as good as I wanted it to be, it felt like, Adam Vicarel approves C- work, like don't work with that guy. And firstly, this forced moment of hiring a contractor taught me that it's not at all like what you think it is. It's not going to be doomsday. It also taught me that my level of what I think a thing needs to be is not necessarily your clients or your, the people that are hiring you to do the work. They don't have the eye that, we as entrepreneurs do. So I also learned that what is maybe a 90 out of 100 in my eye, in the eyes of the clients, they don't know the difference. They think it's perfect. That one particular moment, being forced to let go, basically made me, and we got so much done in such a short period of time. I kind of had this aha epiphanistic moment where I was like, oh my gosh, if I delegate, if I learn to collaborate better with other individuals and grow a little bit of a team, we can go way farther, way faster. And it's not about speed and distance as much as it is not constantly taking on everything as an entrepreneur by yourself, because you do have to do accounting and project management and account management and also the creative work or whatever it might be that you're doing. So all that to say, I was forced into it. I quickly learned it was the best choice that I ever made. And I am constantly now trying to delegate as much as I can at any given time so I can focus on what I'm best at.
Yes.
And Adam, I just want to echo something you had said, because it's a conversation I end up in a lot. Because of working in comics, I spend a lot of time, just as much time, talking to artists, narrative artists, illustrators, people who also do, some amounts of graphic design, things of that nature. But writers and artists both, we end up talking about how long it took us in our careers to realize what you were saying about, like, what I feel like is 90%. Most people cannot perceive that 10% difference, and
or even the 20% difference.
Right. And the difference it makes for you to just really set time limits for yourself and get it done and be okay with putting out the 80% version and finding out that other people are like, you did it. You know what I mean? And saving yourself those extra 2 weeks of just hand wringing and beating up on yourself and pursuing perfection. This idea of the perfect being the enemy of the good is so relevant in art that you still have to pay your bills, right? Yes. And learning to find this balance and to recalibrate to where you recognize it's work you could be proud of, but it doesn't have to be your life's work when it's still the thing bringing in the money to keep you alive and keep the lights on. It can be really hard to accept this discrepancy, but there's plenty of things that I knew I was under deadline for. And now that my son is old enough, he's wanting to go read stuff, we'll go back and read it. I'm like, hey, this turned out way better than I thought. Why was I sweating this? Why did I think this wasn't good? Like, it plays great. It's whatever. And, we talk about sort of, sometimes if you don't have enough time, you really feel it and you actually can't deliver your good work. But you can have the same problem if you get way too much time and you just start navel gazing and changing things that don't need to be changed. And yeah, and so really just that kind of medium amount of time can be the right target.
There's one other thing I was thinking as you were talking about that, Adam, is finding the balance around how much do I need to know and understand in my business before I pass it off to somebody else. And in the early days when I was getting help, I thought, can somebody just figure this out and do this for me? But realizing, no, I actually need to know it enough, and so that I can manage it and comment on it. And like you were saying, really, have the understanding of what it's taking to get those pieces done.
Yep. And have you found, both of you guys, as you're, working with a contractor, James, you're working with an agent or something like that. Do you guys feel like that process of doing it, I've found that it's never direct. Like it's never easy to let go. It's never like super fluid or streamlined to like figure out this new software and then hand off to a contractor. My personal experience has been, it does take a lot of stumbling and fumbling and messing up. And the whole, like, you learn a lot more when you learn through mistakes as opposed to getting a good pat on the back. Have you guys found that to be true in your industries as well?
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I would say too, for my end of finding those team relationships, I really had to learn over time the wrong match again is cost me more than not having someone there. Like I would say I had about 2 years in LA where my manager and agent were just sending me the wrong places. They weren't doing the work I needed for them. And what it did was there was an opportunity cost where I could have waited 5 more months to find the right partner. And then I could have made a year and a half of positive gain of having them put me in the right rooms or trying to set me up for the right business relationships. And instead I lost 2 years being like, well, I've got someone and they're barking up the wrong tree. I'm going to talk to them about it, see if it resets. I really would have been better off, I think, finding someone that actually understood and was invested in kind of shaping the kind of career that I was trying to have. So I also feel like it's a little more soft skill for my line of work, but making sure you're aligned is so much more important and is a process. It's not just having someone is better than having no one. That might not necessarily be true.
Yeah. Oh, definitely. And I just feel the way that it's like any relationship or like a dance of, really staying in there in the communication, realizing how much do I lean in, how much do I then let go, and then building that live time within in the process of that relationship and role.
So one other, we don't necessarily have to talk real numbers. I don't want to be, indelicate, but something I'm curious about is the evolution of how you balance what you charge for your time versus what kind of demand there is for your services. And I think especially starting out, there's this inclination to be like, oh, I'm just happy anyone's interested. But you don't want to, but I have, definitely seen and learned, especially when I go to hire artists for independent projects. Some people lowball themselves because they just want the work. And I have to say to them, like, you never say that number to another person because a publisher will take you up on it and you're hurting everyone else in your field by saying you can expect a fully drawn page for $35 or something like that. Like, that's insane. Don't say that. And so I, coming up in theater, very often there really is no money, but I tried to ask for something and see what's there. But how do you evolve it over time? I know that, in comics publishing, not all things are equivalent. So like Marvel has a different budget than a smaller publisher, or something that's the licensed book that has kind of a guaranteed audience is different from us trying to launch something original. And so I've learned over time to scale it. And this goes to where I do agree, get to know other peers, get to know other people doing this work professionally. Even if you meet one or two people who are like guarded secrets and view you as competition, there's more work than any one of us could ever do. So there are people out there who recognize that and will talk to you honestly. So I learned really to check in with other people and get a sense of what else is out there, what's fair, am I being lowballed or whatever. But how, does it work differently for you in your fields of how you have to learn when to raise those thresholds, how you find them in the first place?
Yeah. I mean, well, so my business is service, and I am a little bit of a bleeding heart, and I want everybody to receive the service. So, and I want, again, like I said at the beginning, and I was committed, like I want to do what I think is important. And in the beginning of my private psychotherapy practice, I said, okay, here's my fee, here's my sliding scale, and what can you pay? Right. Well, now it's been 23 years. And at this point, for me, one, it is looking at the market rate, because for what you're saying, there's something about actually pricing yourself at like your skill level, and the market rate is huge. So that's something that it influences me, as well as time, because at this point, I barely say yes to anything new ever, because I just don't have the time. So if I do something, it's going to be a much higher rate. And the amazing thing is I have lots of people that work with me now, some of whom are on this call. And so we get to serve people at all different rates. And so that makes me really happy, and also feel good about both serving and then the different price points that we have.
Yeah. And I would echo, I mean, agree with everything Katie said. And I think, James, to your point, I'm such a proponent for price transparency at least in my field. I'm very open with other designers, whether they're, freelance graphic designers or other small studio owners. I will very openly talk about pricing, as well as reach out to people. I feel like there's a level of like ego, and using kind of like the big ego that comes with being self-employed, and almost like giving this perception that you have things dialed, which I don't give a shit to do. Like if people look at me and they're like, that guy kind of doesn't know what he's doing, I'd like, you're right, none of us do. And so I think I have no concern about being very honest and very candid with people. And through that, I'm happy to reach out to other agency owners and be like, hey, what would you charge for this? And that has literally, we just did a project, a few months ago, that 2 years ago, I did the exact same scope of work. It was half the price. A year before that, it was half of that price. So I've literally, on one thing, I've 4x'd my rates in a couple of years. I probably realistically could have done it in a much shorter time period. I think the pricing thing is very scary. It feels like, if you're charging $10,000 for a thing, to all of a sudden just arbitrarily ask for $15,000, it feels like, well, it's arbitrary. Well, like, how can I justify this? The reality is, we as individuals are always learning and absorbing information. So it's not arbitrary. You have learned more, you have grown more, you are offering more value. I was listening to a podcast recently that they basically said, if you're not constantly having people kind of like have sticker shock when you say a price, then you might not be charging enough. And I maybe say this to like the graphic design audience, but I think it's a thing that, when I think of my work, I'm helping businesses sell millions and millions of dollars of products. Like they can pay us a couple grand instead of a couple $100 for the thing. So price transparency is the short answer there.
Well, and I'll add to that when you talk about like the sticker shock or things. I feel so Midwestern that I've always like struggled about the like I deserve more money. Like that sort of squeaky wheel proudness feels, I was always so uncomfortable with it. Two things I think really helped me. Number one was having kids, to where I'm trying to not just ensure my stability or whether I'm having to go through a lean period, but like, can I feed my children next week? You know what I mean? Like if they have a doctor's bill, can I pay it? You know what I mean? And that gave me a degree of just like, I'm not just saying this for me. It's, and I would argue it's not out of greed, but I was still advocating for what I was worth. The other thing is that is a space where having an agent or someone like that, where I have the creative conversation, great, we hit it off, and now I'm going to hand it off to this person whose job is is to like push for more money and see
Milk
where
them
that
for all
is.
they're worth.
It was great. It was great. And my agent has more than paid for themselves, like in terms of the amount they were able to raise from the initial number someone said to me to what we ultimately got, more than paid the percentage they get. And I think they really have that in mind. Like that's always their goal. Can they go over that 15% or whatever? Great. So with an eye on time, because we wanted to keep this about an hour, let me check in on some of these questions that I know people had put in there. One was Amanda was asking if someone could explain what we meant by niche down in this context for because I guess they have a different familiarity from biology. But if either of you want to articulate.
For me personally, at least what I was speaking to is just the idea of, I was speaking to the idea of you are your niche, and the idea of kind of using all of your personal and professional interests, allowing all of that to funnel into like your professional identity. I kind of personally adopt the mindset that work-life balance, that idea assumes that one thing is good and one thing is bad. And I really try to live a little bit more of like work-life integration, very entrepreneurial sentence to say out loud, but like truly allowing those things to be a bit more amorphous and less disparate. And I think in doing that, you become a niche in yourself. And frankly, I feel like that description just complicated matters further.
I can add from my
Please do.
profession. Yeah. Well, people are always talking about niching down, and from a therapy perspective, that's what are the people you work with? What are the issues you work with? So I work with women who I used to work at the domestic violence center. So I have a specialty in women and trauma, or some people specialize in grief, or some people specialize in relationships. And what that does is then it gives people more of an idea of who do we send to you. And so, I mean, Adam, you could even say yours with the hand lettering and murals. That's a particular niche in a way. So it's like, what do we think about you for?
Yeah, and I would add, like, as a writer, I literally have this experience where I go doing a comic convention, and I have all the stuff I've been working on recently laid out that people could buy from me. And there was a period about 6 years ago where it literally went from like an adult grim horror, like body horror kind of thing, all the way down to My Little Pony. And because I spent years initially as an actor before I became a writer, so much I sort of prided myself, and artistically I was really interested in fully transforming. Can I change my voice, my perspective? That was an exciting artistic endeavor. But what I found was people were just baffled to look at my table, and but also I had this secondary experience of someone be like, oh, I loved this thing you wrote. What else do you have that's like that? And I'm like, well, nothing right now, because maybe I did something 4 years ago, but I don't have copies of that anymore. And then what I didn't have was someone who would then follow me to the next thing I would do, or the thing after that, or the thing after that, because I would lose them, right? Like I would zig and zag too far afield that I couldn't build my readership. And so eventually I realized, just like for the longevity of my career, I wanted to shave off the outer 15 or 20% on either end, right? Like I don't want to do something that's like pure dry and grim with no humor to it. And I don't want to do something so young that it has no bite or commentary, because sort of like my incisive humor was such a key core aspect to my identity, that don't hire me for a book that shouldn't say something, and don't hire me for a book that can't have any humor to it. Like focusing back in on that returned, like it sharpened my identity and made it distinct enough that people are reaching out to me for the right opportunities now. And it sort of means something when it says it's from this person. So that's like a visceral experience I have with what that means. Someone asked if we all, because so many of us are entrepreneurs, did we grow up with entrepreneurs in the family to look to for this model of how to live? And I would say not especially, or at least I didn't You disagree? Well, I will feel like I didn't learn lessons from anyone. Like these weren't conversations I was having. I think you were more than anyone
Well,
that I knew.
except that our mother did childcare in our house, did
It's true.
upholstered people's furniture,
Yes.
did sewing for people, refinished furniture. She was kind of always, she was
She was the modern gig worker, just without the apps to help. But you're right. You're right. Yeah, she ran daycare out of her house and always had this flow of people hiring her to do
yeah,
custom upholstery and sewing projects. Yeah, I guess I didn't think of it in those terms because it wasn't
we weren't
branding and going out with business cards. But yeah,
right.
Yeah,
But
well, and
I do. I just want to comment that while we didn't necessarily have family members who were like entrepreneurs suggesting like this is the way, I do have an uncle who, other side of the family, who owns a furniture company. But I think the more than anything, I'm speaking from the perspective of y'all being my older cousins. You guys were always like doing something crazy, traveling around the world. So I think I got it from seeing people that were really intentional about how they were living their lives and
Mhm.
being like, go to Europe. Like, why? Because you can. Like, go
Yeah,
experience some shit. Like, I just feel like there was so much like, do this, then do this, and then do this in society that I feel like y'all, for me, broke out of that.
nice.
And I remember, like, for those that do not know, James Asmus here was in the crowd on a Jerry Springer show once and he put out something. And I remember being like, we can be on TV. So I feel like
And then
y'all
Adam got
inspired
to
me.
be on TV too.
oh yeah, oh yeah.
Yeah.
Real Housewives. I know my
But
family's famous. Go ahead.
um, well, yeah, but I would say, something I feel like, yeah, but probably similarly, in my older sisters, Katie and Susie and Christy, I saw them really feel open to possibility
Yes.
and pursue passion to see where a life could be found in there. Even if you don't see a model ahead of you to just plug yourself into. And
Exactly.
I think I think that left me really open to it, but I was always hyper conscious of like pursuing the arts has a real finicky financial model. So I was also hyper conscious about like limiting my overhead for college or life and things like that, knowing I would have to strike that kind of balance. And like Adam was saying, the first couple of years of doing it, knowing you'd be starving or something. Um, to that end, there was a question I definitely want to make sure we touch on, which someone said, um, do we have advice for someone encouraged to break an attachment to security
Oh,
of a really good safety net, like healthcare retirement plans offered by a current employer to jump into entrepreneurial? Um, and this is where, at least, I'll start by saying, there are many times early on or later on where I have dipped back into part-time employment through someone else in order to balance this. And ultimately, I ended up marrying a wonderful person who gets health insurance through their job. And if I didn't have that, there were definitely other times I would have had to scale back my writing just because of health problems to obtain health insurance in a reasonable, reliable financial manner. But what that made me aware of over time is that there are jobs out there where you can get health insurance working half time.
mhm.
You know what I mean? Where you could be a 0.5 employee and find that thing that's still work you believe in. I still do some work for medical schools out here, helping teach medical students like communication and patient empathy and identifying their own bad habits and things like this across like a whole range of encounters or services or exams and things like that. And that is work I find meaningful. So I sort of started doing it as an actor in Chicago just for money, but I really saw the impact it makes on improving people's compassion and medical outcomes. And so that's something I've been happy to like keep alive in the balance of my work because I still find it meaningful, but it's something that has much more, reliability than freelance writing. And so having that as one of the balls I juggle has been a key factor. And in those, people keep being like, well, if you want to work longer, you can get the insurance, you could get this, that, or whatever. And I could potentially even get it working half time. So the other thing is when we talk about these careers, we don't always front load the things that are not relevant to that conversation, but that might be part of the constellation of how people are getting by. And so your heroes or the people in your field, they might not be telling you everything they're doing if it's something unrelated, but that doesn't mean a ton of them aren't moonlighting and doing something else. I know tons of name writers who are being flown out to some science fiction convention or writing for a television show, and they are teaching, and they are an Uber driver, and whatever the thing is for them. So there's no shame in that. And many people, you'll scratch the surface and find out they're either doing that or they're a trust fund baby. What else?
I think that's
we are not.
Definitely not. I think those are absolutely amazing points. And I think to the question of like summoning the courage to do it, my experience, I did it very early, and I didn't have I was 24-ish, very little like overhead cost in life, and it felt like a good time to take risks. But ultimately for me, I think it was less courage and more the opportunity of, I looked at it as, if I'm able to build a thing that I'm truly passionate about and sustain a comfortable living, what is a few years of sacrifice, maybe overworking, maybe undermaking in terms of my salary, but a few years of sacrifice to then have a career of fulfillment. And so for me, it felt like a very easy risk to take, because worst case scenario, I just get a normal job. Best case scenario, I'm making more money than I could at that normal job, and I'm doing something that I'm wildly passionate about on my own terms. And I think as far as courage, that opportunity was enough for me to take bold, courageous steps that I felt otherwise uncomfortable doing.
Nice. And I think I mentioned at the beginning, for me, it was really, I had jobs, started my own thing. As this grew, let go of one or more of these jobs, maybe needed to get another one, and really just did this until it could be really my own thing. But I mean, when I was in grad school and even soon after, I was working at Applebee's. So when I like to tell people, yeah, there's so many different things that you can do to support yourself while you're growing what you really, really want to be doing.
Yeah, and
I did the same thing. Well, just more so, there was the working with agencies, working for myself. Like it was a slow and gradual. It wasn't just like one day out.
Yeah, because you'll as you're building the demand for your work, like everyone is saying, you can sort of shave down the other parts of your life, but I don't think there's a benefit to making yourself insecure. I know a lot of people who moved out to LA with like no preparation. They really hadn't built up a resume or anything like that. And the inability to just strike gold in 6 months or a year or 2 years, whatever they could afford, made them disillusioned and give up forever and abandon that work and be bitter. Whereas I know plenty of people who were working full-time jobs and they were doing their writing, their art at night on the weekend. They'll start to carve out 2 days a month where they're not working their job or scaling back to do this other thing they love, and then they're just trying to put that out there and leverage a little bit of work to get the next bit of work to build up your profile and your audience and your opportunities. And accepting that it's a growth process rather than thinking you have to go all the way out there, because then at a certain point, if it's unsustainable, a lot of people become scarred or scared by that and they don't go back to it. So setting those unrealistic expectations. Similarly, we're about to try to wrap up, which just makes me think of what I was going to ask you both, is if there's a thing we didn't get to that you feel like you're sort of always dying to impart on people whenever you're having these kinds of conversations. And I started to get to one thing right there, which I'll just make it mine, which is I think it's really important to understand what your priorities are about why you're doing this, because I know a lot of people who have emotional fallout by pursuing metrics of success you have no control over.
Mm.
And I always tell people in creative fields, you can do your best work and it just doesn't find its audience, either because of a fluke of the market, or it was advertised wrong, or it's just the wrong time for that thing. So if you are setting your goals to be acclaim, awards, or any of this stuff you have no control over, you'll drive yourself crazy and you'll be miserable and you'll embitter yourself to your own work. But if you set goals that are related to what you can control, I want to become better at this than I was before this. I want to know that I delivered on time. I want to complete something. Like really figure out where you are in your personal growth and set those as your metrics for success. Because there's too much you can't control, and those will ruin your relationship to the work. If that's what you're defining by.
Nice. Yeah, there's one coming up just as you were in the last couple of pieces for me. And I was leading a mastermind group last year. And one of the things I just said one day is find the thing that you have enough passion for that you're willing to stay with it for the long haul or for a while, because no matter what it is, it takes time for things to grow, for people to know you. And if you're just doing it just to have more time in your life, that's not going to work. Or just like because it's a good idea, there's not enough like passion, life, energy, commitment to stay in it when things are hard and when it's slow. So make sure it's something that you feel energy around, really.
And Adam, before you answer, I just want to mention, because I see there was a question we didn't directly answer about how we sustain our energy for the entrepreneurship. And I feel like both of what we're saying is a major component to that. I feel like kind of what Katie was saying spoke to it more directly, but I think that's a big part of it for me too, was what I was talking about. But Adam, whatever it is you would like to touch on that we haven't.
Go upon. I mean, I would kind of be echoing similar things as what you guys had. I think, the way you maintain that energy is by being passionate about the thing that you're doing. And I have found that incremental progress towards a thing is way more impactful than sprinting really fast. Like accepting that you are playing the long game in any entrepreneurial pursuits. I think social media, particularly in my industry, continues to, it's like a 23-year-old who's like, you want to learn how to make $1 million in a week? And I'm like, shut up. I mean, yes, but, and I think social media feeds at least our generation, my generation, this idea that it's instant, it's immediate, it's perfect, and all you're going to do is sip Mai Tais in Bali. And I think it's just like, it's not happening. And if it is, it's happening to a 15% of people. So the piece I would leave is accept that it is a long journey. It is a slow journey. But as you guys suggested, if you're doing something that you love and doing it against a metric that is important to you, then long and slow doesn't matter. It feels good. It feels right. And ultimately you will come out on the other side better off for it.
Awesome. Yeah, I agree with that completely also. All right. Well, so if people are interested in your work or just other brain droppings from you, where are other places they can keep up with you, find what you're doing?
For me, it would be, my name's in here somewhere or in the email, on Instagram at Adam Vicarel. Also, my studio's website is vicarelstudios.com. Even if you butcher that spelling, we're the only Vicarels out there, so you'll find me. And lastly, if you're interested in some delicious coffee that also donates meals back to the Cleveland Food Bank, whether or not you're from Cleveland, All Cleveland Coffee, it's all-cleveland.com. And every bag of coffee donates 3 meals back to the food bank. So a cool way to have impact and also stay caffeinated to pursue your entrepreneurial endeavors.
I like that plug. So my website is somaticnaturetherapy.com. And I'm on Instagram, Somatic Nature Therapy Institute, and on Facebook and LinkedIn, as well as my name, Katie Asmus. Yeah.
Awesome. I have a very tentative relationships with social media. I keep quitting ones when I get really upset with people. But so currently I'm just on Instagram for maybe a limited time, and Blue Sky. Instagram is James_Asmus because I got there late, and Blue Sky is just at James Asmus. I'm going to drop my link tree in the chat, which has my mailing list that I don't send out very often. I think for this, I wrote my first one in like 4 months. But I talk a little bit about life stuff and writing stuff in there. And I've got a web store that people could buy comics directly from me and stuff like that too. That's on the link tree as well. Awesome. Well, thank you all so much. I hope this was valuable or inspiring or at least realistic. And, you know, thanks for enabling us to actually have a family reunion amongst our busy, busy lives. Yeah, and you know, I'm always happy if I'll mention on those social media things. I'm always open to try to opine on things if you have particular questions that feel relevant to writing or just arts life in general, any of this kind of stuff.
Nice.
But yeah, thank you all so much.
Yes, thanks for coming. Have a good night. Thanks
If
for
you know
joining
someone
us.
who would want to see a recording of this, you could probably hit up Katie's team through their website.
We'll
If
send
you
it
want to
all
share
out
it with
tomorrow.
someone.
Yeah, we'll send it out here to everyone who signed up.
Awesome. Awesome. All right.
Yes.
Thanks, y'all.
Thank you.
Good night, y'all.
And with that, we'll